A tyrant Fulgencio Batista, a cigar-smoking Castro, a motorcycle-riding Che Guevara, sunny beaches and chants of revolution. January 1st, 1959. A revolutionary government led by Fidel overthrew Fulgencio government. The government turned communist and Cuba was eternally doomed. But whatever be the later part of the story of Cuban Revolution is definitely an exciting one. During the World War II, Japan had wreaked havoc on China. A faction led by Mao Zedong hid in the jungles waiting for their time. The brunt of the Japanese aggression was borne by Nationalist Party or Kuomintang. When the Japanese retreated, Mao and his guerrillas jumped onto what was left of the Kuomintang. On October 1st, 1949, Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong declared the creation of the People's Republic of China and anointed himself the supreme leader. Both modern China and modern Cuba's histories start with revolution. Cuba is now witnessing another revolution that challenges to undo 62 years of its communist history, and this is making China extremely nervous. Hi and welcome. This is TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group, and I'm your host Atul Mishra. In this video, I will tell you about why China is going out of its way to support the Cuban government in suppressing the Cuban Revolution 2021. Let's begin. The anti-government protests underway in Cuba could potentially be a watershed moment for the Latin American country, which has suffered decades of brutal communist rule in which its economic position has gone from bad to worse. Today, there are food and essential supplies shortages in Cuba, and people have had just about enough of socialism for a lifetime. Now they have taken to the streets in what could be a precursor to the grand fall of yet another communist empire, exposing the political ideology and its hollowness. Medicines and vaccines are unavailable. Electricity outages are commonplace, and dissidents are being thrown behind bars en masse. This is a classic recipe for a popular uprising against an oppressive regime, especially if it is a communist one. What do you think the regime will do when faced with the biggest demonstrations seen in 30 years? First step, it will put a ban on the internet and attempt to cut communication lines of the demonstrators. And then it will, in the darkness of a communications blackout, do despicable things to the protesters. Guess who is helping the communist regime of Cuba suppress the free voices of the people by effectuating internet bans in the country? The fellow communist nation of China, ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. There have been reports of Cubans' internet services being cut off across the country, potentially in order to allow authorities to limit the spread of the videos of the protests. Florida Senator Marco Rubio on Sunday made a stunning claim on Twitter. He said, the Cuban regime will use Chinese infrastructure and tools with the approval of the CCP, of course, to curb online communication in the country. After the internet was indeed blacked out on Sunday, the Republican senator said, I warned about this earlier today. It is happening and will continue. By the way, they use a system made, sold, and installed by China to control and block access to internet in Cuba. Such claims are not far from the truth. In fact, it is very much true that the sole company in Cuba that provides internet access, Etecsa, has three primary technology providers that are all Chinese: Huawei, TP-Link, and ZTE. In 2017, the Open Observatory of Network Interference, or the OONI, a global community that measures internet censorship, found traces of Chinese codes in both the surface and the interfaces used for access portals for Wi-Fi connections. The report stated, Etecsa's login portal through which Cubans access the internet appears to have been written by Chinese developers, since its source code contains comments written in Chinese. This indicates that Etecsa likely hired Chinese developers to implement the portal. Curium, a Swedish NGO that defends digital rights, data protection, and internet security, found definitive Chinese links in a report analyzing which technologies were being used in Cuba to block access to websites. It also reported the possible presence of a Huawei product used for web filtering. Cubans got access to the internet in 2015 and were allowed to use mobile data on mobile phones only in 2018. Cuba's digital space has always been heavily censored, and China seems to be aiding the communist regime in its endeavor to survive the popular uprising. Communism has failed world over. China, the Soviet Union, Venezuela, Cuba, these are all entities which are failures. The Soviet Union has already collapsed, and China too is going down the path of disintegration. Yet, China is the only power which can salvage the situation and prevent the ideology of communism from being put to shame globally once again. So it is aiding the Cuban government to suppress the voice of demonstrators who have taken to the Latin American countries' streets. Unlike in Myanmar, where China explicitly and unapologetically supported the military junta after their February coup in hopes of installing a puppet regime in the country, the case of Cuba is rather peculiar for Beijing. Here you have a country where communism was established by Fidel Castro himself, where the communist regime is now surviving on the edge and is on the brink of a collapse. In Cuba, China is trying to protect communism from imminent fall. Part of China's support for the Cuban regime stems from domestic insecurity. The CCP knows that the people of China are beginning to have enough of oppression and are soon about to rise in revolt against Xi Jinping and his lackeys. By saving the Cuban government, China will be able to convince its people and the world that communism is not a lost cause just yet, and that might give the CCP a few more years in power.